Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's meeting of the President's Management Advisory Board. I'm Steve Brockelman, the Designated Federal Officer and Director of the PMAB, as we affectionately call it. We are webcasting live. After this morning's subcommittee sessions, we're now gathering for the full PMAB meeting. As a federal advisory committee, the PMAB meetings are open to the public, so we are webcasting, and all of the participants are in listen-only mode. I think at that point I can turn it over to Beth Cobert, the chair of the PMAB.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody who's here today. We have a terrific group of people assembled, both our members from PMAB. Thank you again for your service and for coming. I know from the subcommittee conversations, at least the one I was in, and we'll brief those out to the public later, a bunch of really valuable and most importantly practical insights that will shape how we move forward with our initiative. So a thank you in advance for that. I also wanted to note, again, because you probably can't see this if you're on the webcast, the set of folks that are in the room today for this conversation. One of the areas of focus for the President's Management Advisory Board this year, something that is very important to the President, very important to the administration, is the topic of customer service. And so we have in the room today leadership from across a broad swath of federal agencies, large numbers of deputy secretaries, assistant and undersecretaries, and importantly, as part of our cross-agency priority goal that we've set around customer service, which is being co-led by Carolyn Colvin, the acting administrator of the Social Security Administration, as a cross-government effort. One of the actions we've taken as we've initiated that this spring is to ensure that every agency has designated a senior individual as the person who within that agency will be the focal point for their efforts around improving customer service. As we've learned from our previous discussions with the PMAB, while at some level customer service is everybody's job, having somebody who can be the focal point for understanding what really matters to customers and helping drive that improvement is critically important. And so we are joined here today by a large number of the individuals who have volunteered to take on that responsibility within their agencies. And importantly, they are incredibly passionate about this issue. We've been having a number of working group meetings, and in some cases we say people have volunteered, but in this case they actually really all have volunteered instead of having been volunteered. Our agenda today, we're going to do a quick update on the President's Management Agenda with a bit of a focal point around some of the places where our colleagues from PMAB have helped us make progress, because I think it'd be good for all of us to understand that. We're then going to do a quick real-time flip and start with the discussion about implementing the digital services strategy that Steve Van Rokel and Micah Dickerson will lead, and then have a couple of remarks by Megan Smith, who just joined the government last week as the new Chief Technology Officer of the United States. She brings a terrific background of innovation and leadership at Google and elsewhere, and we are thrilled to have her here to take up the mantle and make progress on something that's really important. We'll then take a quick break and have a report out from the subcommittee sessions, and then adjourn. So again, thank you everybody for joining, both the folks who are joining on the webcast and the folks who have taken time out to be here today. So let me just quickly.
Sorry, Beth. Can we just make sure that Shantanu and Jeff are on the line?
Shantanu and Jeff, are you on the line?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Terrific. Okay. And I know you probably can hear me because I'm sitting next to the phone. As others speak up, it'd be helpful. We might move the phone or trade seats might be the easiest thing to do, or use the mics. So just quickly, if you flip through the agenda, as we've talked about many times, for those of you who are part of the administration group that's been working on it, you've heard me do this too many times. 4 pillars of the management agenda: effectiveness, which is all about how we deliver services to businesses and citizens; efficiency, making sure we're getting value out of federal spending; supporting economic growth through efforts like open data and lab to market; and the foundation on which all of that is built, which is a world-class federal workforce, leveraging the immense talents that are in the workforce here today, ensuring that those employees are engaged and we are taking advantage of their skills, and helping us bring recruiting and hiring to the fore. with a focal point in particular around the senior executive service as the core linchpin for helping to lead the vast federal government, but lead it at the very tactical way where work really gets done. So those are the elements we're working on. Effectiveness, I'm going to come back to because we're going to talk about a number of those things today. But just a couple of highlights. For those of this group, particularly the PMAB, we've talked in the past about benchmarking and using data to drive some basic things about efficiency. For those of us like me who are data and management nerds, I spent most of July almost every day doing a benchmarking review with each of the federal agencies. It was an effort that Dan Tanglerini from GSA and I led, great support from everyone. And I can look at all the agency folks here in the room, and they were all part of that effort. We literally built a new set of benchmarks to measure the cost effectiveness of administrative support functions and use those to stimulate a dialogue within the agencies about where those agencies themselves saw opportunities for improvement. And we did this not just at the level of the overall agency, but actually at the level of the components. Many agencies, we talked a little bit about it earlier, whether it's Commerce or HHS or Transportation, Justice, have incredibly different things with different missions inside their agency. So comparing them at the macro level is helpful, but doesn't really get you that far. And they will also be using this to develop tools that will allow folks in the agencies to do their own comparisons and set peers and benchmarks to do this. I think, and we talked about this early on, I know, in some of the PMAB efforts. So it has actually come to fruition and will be part of an ongoing process where we're going to integrate that with some of the IT reviews and portfolio stats, which is something else that I know has surfaced from this group. We continue to make progress on strategic sourcing and shared services. We have a new set of shared services providers. They are about to announce a new governance framework, which actually, to this theme, helps think about how their customers, because they have a few big customers, have a voice that looks at quality and service. So again, a lot of things that we've talked about with you here. Economic growth, just quickly, we continue to plug along around open data with a series of hacks, jams, and paloozas. Megan's team and the rest of OSTP has been core partners in driving this. Commerce has been a big element, as well as many other agencies is getting things out there in the public that they can use. And we continue to make work on lab to market with our colleagues. Last one I just want to highlight for this group, because again, it's a topic we've covered with each of you, people and culture. Employee engagement, which all of the folks here I know from my conversation, employee engagement matters both because it matters to employees, but importantly, it matters to how we deliver against our mission. You guys, I know in the past have seen the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. A huge shout out to our colleagues from OPM. They have taken that massive amount of data and done actually a set of really valuable things this year. One, they have shrunken by a third the time at which it takes to get the data out to agencies. So it is now down to 2 months. It comes in August now. That enables folks, and it's actually sort of good timing because that's even, as you think about it, as everybody sort of thinks about the year sort of starts in September it's not the start of the fiscal year or the start of the calendar year, but it is the start of the school year, so it has a certain rhythm to it. So you can go into that with new data. They've created a dashboard, again, building off some of the input from all of you, that leaders can use. And I'm looking across the room at folks who I know have already been digging into that because we actually can look and see who's using it now. So it's getting used. And we now have the ability to use this and break it down into roughly 20,000 units. So you can really get to the comments earlier, folks at the front line and compare like operations in different parts of the country. What are folks in one regional office doing versus another? They face the same constraints about sequesters and pay freezes in the past and an operating environment, but yet some of them are managing to do amazing things. How do we figure out who those people are and lift them up? So we've got a tool that enables us to do this real time, and each of the deputy secretaries has committed to working through that process, identifying agencies. And I know from the conversations that everybody is looking at this data. So this is a big step forward. The proof will be in the pudding in terms of how we use it, but I think we've got a baseline that is much better than when we started, and your input in helping us shape that was really valuable. I want to just highlight, and by the way, we've been doing that also through our Chico, that's the Chief Human Capital Officer Council. We've had a set of conversations with the Labor Management Council, which is where we work with the unions on a range of issues as to how we can bring this tool together. So really important. Another piece where this group has had provided us really valuable guidance is around senior leadership development, the SES. Again, we are doing some work and rolling out a number of different pilots, a new leadership development program and onboarding program for SES that starts not just with, an onboarding program is actually a bad term for it. It starts when you onboard, but the whole mindset is, as a senior leader, you still have an obligation to learn and train, and how do you do that? How do you build networks across people? Again, I actually went back and looked at the notes from some of the prior meetings, and it actually reflects a lot of the spirit, and that definitely shaped our thinking. So I wanted just to make all of you aware of those contributions. And one piece, because we're going to talk a little less about this, but we continue to also work on a number of the things, which is on page 9, around, let me call it management of commodity IT within the federal government, to figure out how we can drive down cost, improve effectiveness, which will free up funds to do the mission critical things that we're working on. So that was the speed review of where we are. Again, happy to answer questions offline, but I think it's important and wanted you to really hear, because my colleagues from the PMC, the deputy secretary, we get together every month, we talk about this stuff all the time. And the conversations and input that you have has really helped shape this thinking, and we will continue to come back to you in each of these sessions with a report on our progress and what we're doing, and also more so in the next one than this one, because we have a lot to cover, a chance for you to give us some additional input about how we can take these things to the next level. So with that, a big thank you for all of you. That was the speed version of the management agenda. I grew up in New Jersey, so I know how to talk fast. I also wanted to make sure we had time for the next parts of the conversation. One of the things that was been a core element focus for the president since he got here, for the team that preceded me in many, many forms, has been thinking about how do we improve the digital experience that citizens have with government. We are focused on customer service here overall, but we know that there is nothing that we do today inside the federal government, frankly, inside a business, where technology doesn't touch in some way, shape, or form. It could be how you talk to people, talk in quotes. It could be the information that enables people at the front line to do their work better. It's the data that enables you to make smarter policy decisions. It is embedded in everything we do. And raising our game on this is an absolute priority. We've been working on this for a while. You've given us some good input and advice. We've been starting to build some things, leveraging a lot of progress that's already being made inside of agencies, which have a bunch of great talent, inside of the eGov office within OMB, working with our colleagues at OSTP, working with our colleagues at GSA to say, how do we basically take this to the next level? So I'm going to turn the floor over to Steve Van Rokel, who's the Federal Chief Information Officer, who's been at the heart of driving this, and Mikey Dickerson, who has recently joined us. We are thrilled to have him and the rest of the team to help start up this organization that we previewed in the budget called the U.S. Digital Service. And it's really about how do we actually take this focus of modern IT delivery and make that the way the federal government does business, not the way the federal government would like to do business. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve and Mikey.
Great. Well, thank you, Beth. And it's great to be here with PMAB, especially since many of these initiatives that have kind of fed into this were launched in conjunction with advice we had gotten from all of you. I think, as you know, and we've talked about in the past, transforming federal IT is a journey, and it was a journey that really had to start at the foundations of efficiency. in the fiscal climate we found ourselves in the government, where IT spending was growing 7% a year on the compound annual growth rate prior to 2009. The mindset in government was to do more, we must spend more, and not really a mindset of technology brings new resources to bear on doing things better, faster, cheaper, and in a much more engaged way with our customer. And so we started really around efficiency. And you remember, I think it was at a PMAB meeting maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we launched the portfolio stat process that we've been engaged in now our 3rd season. We're just wrapping up. We have 2 more agencies left to go. And that has evolved into a really robust discussion both around data and metrics as well as really customer outcomes and everything else in between. And that efficiency conversation is really now inflecting into effectiveness. How do we, now that we've kind of taught ourselves both the strategic nature of technology and government and that we can do more without spending more, how do we then go in and do a much better job of delivering customer-centric solutions? And this is as much about focus as it is customer centricity on how do we take the myriad of things we do across government and focus our efforts in on key deliverables, things that will have the highest return for our customers, things that are highest transaction, things that are the highest touch points, much of which we also brought up in our customer feedback discussion just a little bit ago that we'll talk about later. The one thing we really learned on this journey, in addition to that efficiency inflection point, was, government operates in a very decentralized way. You may, from an outsider perspective, you may think that government's sort of just an enterprise. It's a technology group that is pretty finite. Well, government, from being on the inside, what you realize is government is more of a segment of the economy. It's a very, very large enterprise, 2.1 million civilian employees plus the Department of Defense and the other branches. Not to mention the intertwined nature of the work we do with the private sector, with citizens and communities around the world. And so in that decentralized mode, the standard operating procedures that agencies of government own, the creation, delivery, and customer service aspects of those solutions they deliver. And what we've found is that, working with government agencies, the types of talent we have in place in certain cases may not be the broadest set of talent to deliver the most comprehensive solutions. The type of processes we have in place aren't necessarily the right ones. And oftentimes the partners we engage maybe have embedded ways of doing things or are very prescriptive in the way they do this. And so we have proposed, and this, I'm jumping to slide 13 now, really kind of a multi-pronged strategy to transforming and doing smarter IT in government that really is around people, processes, and procurement in government, as well as building new capacity in government to deliver solutions. On the far left side, you'll see we highlight Portfolio Stat 2014. The difference in Portfolio Stat 2014 is that we asked agencies of government to identify key mission-critical solutions that they deliver, boiled down to 1 or 2 key activities that they do. We have if you've tracked the IT dashboard, the place that we track all the IT investments across government, there's about 7 to 10,000 items up there. About 700 of those are deemed as kind of critical in agencies, or what we call major investments. 700 is still for us too much of a boil the ocean motion, and so we asked agencies to really identify kind of what are those top 2 or 3 things that you do, and then we can then provide focus on helping them deliver better solutions in that way. We also then announced the delivery or the creation of new capacity within my office in OMB in the White House called the Digital Service. What the digital service is run in pilot phase this year. It's proposed in the President's budget for 2015, and we're really encouraged by the conversations we've been having with Congress about appropriations in that space to further build out this capacity. But what the digital service is really all about is creating a centralized capacity within government to bring technologists, user experience people that understand how to deliver great customer service or end-to-end customer service, deliver high-scale systems, et cetera, in a central capacity capacity can then go work with agencies in targeted ways to help them understand where are the gaps in their ability to deliver solutions. Where are they missing that right person to go do this? Where are they missing this right capability? Where are their procurements maybe going off track in a way that's not going to deliver a solution in a 21st century way? And so the digital services goal is to go in a very focused way and understand from agencies where are those gaps and how do we then go fill those gaps and build mechanisms to deliver that. And the filling of the gaps really are in the center column, the management levers. And we think the gaps are really, to boil it down into three areas: people, process, and procurement. On the people side, the work we're doing in that space is kind of multidimensional. One aspect is GSA, the General Services Administration, in conjunction with our creation of the digital service, has created a new delivery capacity called 18F. Their headquarters is at the corner of 18th and F, if you want to know where they got that name. And what this...
I have a few questions about that from our branding group.
Oh, yeah, okay, good. That would be good to dive into. And so the team at 18F was actually created from former presidential innovation fellows, built this team at 18F. They've grown in size and are hiring technologists and other experts in the space to really deliver delivery capacity in a targeted way inside agencies. So if you were to go to an agency and say, we're going to take on this big thing, the 21st century way of doing that is you build a minimally viable product and you build upon that product and you iterate and things like that. 18F has the capacity to help agencies go in and build that. Great thing about them being in the General Services Administration is GSA has the ability to build agencies back in a cost recovery way. And so without a 9-month, 12-month, 18-month procurement motion, you can literally in a week sign an MOU with GSA and get this team in to come in and start work right away. Or more importantly, if the digital service sees gaps, we may know of 18F professionals that can come in and help fill those gaps. We also have the Presidential Innovation Fellows housed in the 18F team. We've made that move where the PIFs, which we just swore in yesterday morning.
Presidential Innovation Fellows.
Yes, the round 3 Presidential Innovation Fellows were sworn in yesterday and are deployed into government to work on targeted innovation challenges. But we see this as sort of a virtuous cycle where these people can come in. The other things we're looking at in the people category is, one, working with the Office of Personnel Management on flexible hiring in the tech space. Tech hiring, any of you that deal with tech in the private sector know that the competitive nature of hiring technologists in this country is really, really tough. Technology hiring has grown about 4 times the rate of other categories of hiring in our country, and government has a hard time competing in the space when our hiring timelines are hundreds of days, that our compensation maybe doesn't match. We do have mission and the call on the mission side, but oftentimes it's the logistical aspects that slow us down. And so flexible hiring is really looking at, can we build more flexibility into the way we hire technologists to bring them in? Something we have today with lawyers, we have with cybersecurity experts and procurement officials. We're looking at, can we bridge that into the tech space and provide that with agencies? We're running pilots today in a few targeted agencies to sort of prove out the value of this right now. The second is targeted recruiting, and this is where we get a cadre of people in a community together, both through the digital service 18F, the Presidential Innovation Fellows, and other agencies that are sort of connected to these communities, and cast a wider net, telling people out there that there are jobs available in the federal government. We'd love technologists to come in and work in this way. Part of that is also looking at flexibility in providing rotational opportunities for people in the private sector to rotate into government. So we're running pilots right now where companies are offering their employees in a non-conflicted, ethical way, sabbatical programs where they can take, say, 2 months off, come take a rotation in the government to work on a targeted project. And so we're running that now, and part of them we're going to be working with us in the digital service here. The second area of process, we actually mailed this out to the PMAB in preparation for this meeting, is something we call the Digital Services Playbook. And this is really a collection of plays we expect to see agencies run on their high impact investment. There's 13 in them now. We've crowdsourced this, we put it out, it's up on GitHub, we're asking for people to give us feedback. And this is really a set of best practices that say things like, number one, name a senior accountable person who can bridge both the technology and the business needs. We often see in agencies someone who's very policy focused, maybe running a project that doesn't have a lot of visibility into the delivery, or someone who's very technology focused, who doesn't have a lot of visibility into the outcomes and the mission. And so we need people, and we're going to help agencies fill those gaps to identify those people on those most important things. And then our expectation is that agencies follow this playbook and develop solutions based on this. And this is where we can come in and help with engineering reviews or more targeted engagements to help them move there. And then the last area, procurement, one of the things we have seen time and time again working with agencies is you may have a thoughtful technologist, you may have a thoughtful mission-focused person that wants to go and do the right thing to deliver a solution, but oftentimes they will run into a barrier at the point of the procurement motion or a legal person sort of reviewing the work that they're doing or otherwise. And what you find in having run an agency myself, the operations of an agency myself, what I found is that the federal acquisition requirements, this 2,000-page document that describes how to actually buy and procure things in the federal government, actually provides a lot of flexibility if you find the right section.
If you find page 1,292.
Exactly.
There are people who know where to find it, though.
And there are people who know how to find it. And so what we decided to do is have really a can-do attitude. And what we did is actually reassembled our favorite sections of the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Requirements, into this new document. We didn't rewrite them. We didn't recompile them. We didn't run through a regulatory process. We actually just went and grabbed our favorite sections that map to the playbook that say in government, you can do agile, you can do modular, you can leave room for innovation, you can leave room for requirements to evolve over time in a way, you can hire multiple vendors to work on a single product in a very componentized way. And so the tech FAR, importantly, one, calls out those sections, but secondly, in each case references agencies who have actually done the work, who've actually demonstrated the use of those sections, and gives you contact information, gives you boilerplates, gives you other things to say, if you want to do it that way, which is our expectation, go grab that procurement they used and reauthor it in your own solution space. And so this will, I think, in large part give people the way of running down the hall and saying, now I have a way of delivering solutions the way I want to. Now, there are cases across all three of these and more that we do believe will take legislative action, in the hiring space, procurement space, and otherwise. And one of the things we're also working on is looking at what are those legislative levers that we need to seize upon, and how can we work with Congress on making sure that we can rewrite the laws to make them more 21st century. Many of the laws that affect this space were written before the notion of the internet. And other things, and so time is now to really seize upon that. The outcomes here are really kind of self-apparent. That a lot of what we're doing is our angle we're taking on all of this is customer-centric government. Start with the customer, work our way back, versus start with the policy and work our way forward. Agile or modular, the normal motion in government of these big, grand, unifying theories, these large monolithic kind of approaches that are multi-year, hundreds of millions of dollars that are doomed for failure the day they're written. We think starting small, working on that, delivering within 90 days to, and building upon solutions and success, and really failing fast versus failing big is the order of the day on this. A big motion, and you'll see this referenced in the playbook, is that we intend on solutions being developed in the open, and so getting more crowd involvement, getting more sharing across agencies for capabilities and things that we deliver is important. And then we really think that this will drive lower cost and more mission output. In every case where we go in and work directly with agencies on taking these approaches, we see better, faster, and cheaper solutions coming out of the gate.
Yeah. Steve, a question for you.
Please.
On the two groups here, Presidential Innovation Fellows and the Digital Service, how will you determine where they engage and how they engage, and what is your expectation in terms of the people receiving them into their organizations? How do you expect to manage through that process?
So the real difference between the two of them is the Presidential Innovation Fellows starts with need and backs in with people.
Okay.
The 18F team starts with people and backs into need. And so what we do is we actually run a bit of a competition in government to have agencies propose to us innovation challenges. So we do a bake-off, and we have all the agencies show up and kind of pitch us, and there's a board that we vote and go through selecting what are the innovation challenges. We then put those out and advertise them and have people apply. Presidential Innovation Fellows tends to be shorter term as well, about 6 months to a year programs, where 18F, and actually a lot of the former Presidential Innovation Fellows, after coming and thinking I'm just going to be there 6 months, got sort of inspired and now joined the 18F team to say I'm a user experience expert, or I'm an agile development expert, or I'm this or that. I can do high scale systems. I can do these sort of things. They join the 18F team then as a resource that can then be deployed into agencies as we identify really prioritization and need through both the digital service at the kind of top of the pyramid and the middle level of agencies being able to kind of call on them to engage on specific solutions.
Okay.
I can talk about that a little bit,
Yeah.
actually. Hi, I'm Mikey. I can talk about that a little bit, actually. I think I can make it fairly concrete, the difference between the business models of those few different things, and this is a question we get a lot, so I'm glad for the opportunity to talk about it a little bit. There are several differences in recruiting, hiring, everything else organizationally, but to your question about how do they set their priorities, most of the units, 18F and PIF both have in common that they are forward-looking. They are doing projects that haven't started yet. The process for agencies to propose work for Presidential Innovation Fellows and go through that competitive process for next year is starting now. So they're planning things into the future. The U.S. Digital Service, my projects tend to be things that launched years ago and are not going very well, so we're very operational. We embed where we're needed. Our primary work product is not. This is another thing that gets very hard to. It's a nuance that gets very hard to get out in the press. But our primary work product is not memos and advisory statements and new processes and stuff like that. It's actual working, functioning services. And our Exhibit A is healthcare.gov, because that happens to be my background. That's how I first got involved in the government. Was I came and worked on healthcare.gov as part of the team that put that back together. So we found that to be a big gap. It's a harder job to sell, as you might imagine. If you've ever worked with engineers or technical people at all, everybody wants to start with a blank slate and a green field and build the next great thing that's going to be awesome and make all the decisions along the way. That's the job everybody wants. The job that not as many people want is somebody already built this thing and it's not working at all, and it's really important, but somebody needs to fix it. So that was a big gap, and the healthcare.gov situation really kind of threw that into sharp relief for the whole country to see all at once that we didn't have any group to perform the function of not to sound too grandiose, but not to perform the function of like the Navy SEALs or the Special Forces, where when there's a problem, they go to the problem without preconditions, without stopping to consider whether this mission's too hard or whether it can't be done, or, if you tell them to go, they go. And that's a thing that we do from the digital service.
I think interestingly, and again, looking at colleagues, looking at folks around the room, for the folks who've gotten a taste of this, either through 18Fs that have 18F work in their agencies, PIFs that have worked in their agencies, that we are actually not having trouble channeling demand from program folks within agencies. I spend much of my time with folks, as do these folks, saying, okay, we'd like to do that. We are trying to keep the digital service, it's a pilot, it is not yet fully funded, as Steve mentioned, so we're trying to keep it focused on a few big things from which we will both fix those things, as Mikey said, and say, okay, what did we do to do that? What did we need to have in place? And how can we take that thing that actually was important and get it into more other stuff so that they don't run into the same problem the next time? So it's a fix, do real work, take what you learn from that, and move it out. That's explicitly the model, so. Comments and then questions? So that's this, again, this is intended to be more of a dialogue, not a, so go ahead. Mike, any other thoughts before, or Steve, before we?
Yeah, and Mikey feels like I don't know, you've been here 3 weeks or so.
Yeah, a month.
A month, and so he feels like old hat. I should have introduced Mikey leading into digital service as well, and hopefully you've all seen the video. I think you were all emailed the video of his arrival before, which is great. But Mikey joins us from Google, as he mentioned, was intimately involved in the health effort of working with HHS and CMS on the repair of healthcare.gov, and we're very, very excited to have him here. Comments? I'd really love to know, are there missing pieces? Are there
Yeah.
things that from a comprehensive standpoint, you think we should maybe add?
The only comment that I would make is, and I'm sure Mikey has thought about this, so much of this is repair and react, but there's a whole technology quest element to this, which is how do you guys figure out what's new under the sun so that you don't build yourself a cul-de-sac on the next release. And I'm sure, Mikey knows what's new under the sun based on where he came from, but in probably 6 months from now, there'll be other new things under the sun. So the thing I would just recommend, or even just to ask you how you're doing it, is how do you keep this pipeline full of what's new on technology? Because in reading it, so much was about repairing websites, figuring out your internet presence through traditional means. And, let's face it, it's all going mobile, for example.
Yeah, so that's a totally reasonable question. The reason you see us spend so much words on the kind of the remediation projects, you might say.
Because everything's broken.
Well, you're right. I mean, to be honest, that'll be a good day when my biggest concern is whether we're up to date with the latest mobile or the new iPad or whatever's beyond the iPad that I don't know yet, right? Ideally that'll happen. The best answer I've got to how do we stay current, how do we keep moving forward, the answer I'm most interested in anyway is I think all of us think it is always going to be the case with the size of the government's IT spending year over year that most of it's going to be done by the private sector through the contracting system. We don't have nobody has any crazy plan for that to really change. We'd like to do a little more of it in-house maybe, but it'll only ever be a little. And if we can make that ecosystem more vibrant, more effective, if there's actual real effective competition there. Most of those things, the really disruptive things, rarely come from the established huge companies, right? That's kind of always been that way in technology. And so if smaller, more nimble companies that haven't existed for as long, that maybe don't have the 5 years of tax returns to show, which is one of the things that's hard for them to get through right now, if we can open the door to them and make them available for agencies to hire, I think you'll see a lot of interesting things like that happen. And I am actually very interested in all those kind of structural reform elements, the answers to make that kind of stuff happen. Some of it's going to turn out to be federal procurement policy, some of it's going to turn out to be the FAR, some of it's going to turn out to be hiring practices. That's actually a huge one that makes it difficult for the government right now. The answer is going to be a lot of pieces in a lot of places, and we're very interested in, from the U.S. Digital Service, as part of OMB and this whole landscape of all these other organizations, we're really interested in pushing those initiatives forward, but it's really important to me anyway that it come from a place of being informed by people who are operational on the ground, seeing the problems. I'm deeply skeptical of reform efforts that come from other places that don't have the hands-on experience. A lot of those, I'm looking at a landscape right now which is littered with the corpses of well-intentioned reform efforts that have come for the last 20 years that aren't having the effect that they were meant to have, and now they're just another obstacle I have to somehow navigate over, right? So that's a huge fear. That's why we're not convening meetings and writing recommendations for the legislative team right now. That's not what my team's spending its time on. I hope that day comes, but right now we've got fires to put out, basically.
So, at some level, many of the PMAB members, we've been having this discussion around IT with all of you for quite some time. And we'd love to, as that's one thought about sort of staying connected, but other thoughts and questions, because again, we're part of this is we've got a new model. We like our model, but we also know we're going to adapt our model as we go forward. So,
well, one of the things that you've mentioned is that, I think you mentioned it, Steve, is that any successful IT project, it's not an IT project, it's a business project, and you have to have an IT owner and the business owner, right? And so, you know, we have the IT tech, you know, owners here to the left, but I guess I'm just wondering, who's joined at the hip with you from a business, you know, what's the digital journey we're trying to map out for the entire, you know, experience, and who's prioritizing that?
Yeah.
Because, you know, one of the things that we've talked about a lot is that these things just don't work if they're considered that, okay, that's an IT digital issue.
That's right. And we, portfolio stat, based largely, I think, on investment review boards, we review, you know, we looked at
Right.
your company and others, is really that venue for us. It is where we sit down with the agency's leadership, the head of procurement, finance, people, all the different aspects to understand what's the outcome, what's the business outcome you're trying to drive, and then what are the levers we can pull to implement that from is it funded well? Do you have the right people on it? Do you have the right processes? Are you doing the right focus from your customer perspective to get that done? I think, Mikey, one of the things that we actually, I think, talked about this morning was that, you know, these are never really just technology
No,
problems.
they're not.
They're, you know, it's the way that the procurement was written, or it was the way that you just didn't have the right people on it, or you just didn't have the right, you know, thing to drive the outcome you wanted to drive. And so the goal here is to start with the customer and start with the outcome and work our way back. And whatever it takes to get that done, we think we're going to have to do that. And so the digital service, the question we have, we can be very focused today because of, as Mikey said, we're putting out fires. We can kind of focus in a very IT kind of way. But I do believe that this is going to evolve into, you know, that one portfolio stat is becoming more of a management stat and kind of a broader set of activities across all the levers of management. And the types of talent you'll have in the digital service will probably evolve over time as well, to be a lawyer, you know, an HR person, you know, people that kind of know how to drive the outcomes you want to do across the multidimensionality of the solution. Right now, the way we're doing that is you know, Beth's organization has all the management functions, and we have representation in all of those cases involved in all of these, as well as we are creating detailed opportunities and rotational opportunities for other members of government to rotate through on these projects. And so we're not only bringing talent, but we're cross-pollinating skills into that space. So, but it is an opportunity space I think we have to think about.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to have any of the other folks talk about it, because actually I know there's a lot of people around this table who are actually embedded in that process. I'd also, frankly, I'd love to turn the question back to you guys around, if you take this sort of premise that says, right, we all agree, these things are about delivering services, they can't be owned by the IT folks, they have to be owned by, in the private sector, it was the business folks, and at least in my experience, the transition from even business folks sort of thinking it's the IT department's problem
Right.
to it's my problem has made a lot of progress. It's still probably not perfect, but it'd be great to get, for those of you who've been part of that journey outside of the federal government, the stuff that made that work, because I think we are partway down that journey here. I think for the folk, there's a lot of people who believe in it, but sort of we've got a lot of infecting that through organizations to do. So I'd love I would certainly welcome folks' perspective on how you help drive that transition in your own organizations or ones you saw, because without that, we will be stuck.
Well, just a couple of comments. One is to think about the IT strategy as part of the business's competitive strategy, so that it is not something that is separate and distinct, and it's how, in a business or in a service environment, it's how you accomplish your objectives. The other is to develop an architectural view that starts with the business model and the business processes and articulates how the technology is an integral part of that service delivery process. And that's often a joint activity that builds a common cohesive view. In today's world, it all starts with mobile and making certain that whatever you're doing and meeting your customers' needs, it's from the outside in regard to that. The other thing I've had success with personally is training, is to bring in and provide the general management staff some level of understanding of some of the basic processes and tools and capabilities.
You know, Beth, I'm thinking back to, as Ron's talking, the first project we took on as PMAB, which was the IT prioritization portfolio.
Yep.
And, you know, I said at the time, and I'm still living it, to really embed that notion that there's no such thing as an IT or technology issue. There's a business challenge, and here's the pieces. That the most important thing is to have the senior business leader, whoever that is in the respective things, present in the room.
Yep.
You just can't delegate it. I mean, I can't be, everybody wants, everyone wants to sit on the big strategic meeting and this, and we're talking about that, but there's no delegating. If you're signaling that it's important and you're sitting through that prioritization meeting, that sends the signal. And you really, you know, we've talked about this, but there's simply no way around the senior business leaders' engagement in the process. I still, 5 years into the drill at Bloomin' Brands, am sitting through portfolio stats. It less and less, but you know, there's no delegation that makes this a cultural pivot. It just, you know, and so to the extent that people show up and are in the room that are the business leaders, then guess what? It's going to become part of the culture. To the extent that it continues to be delegated, it's just not.
Yeah, yeah.
100%.
You'll be happy to know that all the folks in this room have been through their share of those this summer,
Right?
in
I
a
mean,
good way.
there's no substitution for it, right?
Yeah.
Well, plus bridging on the conversation we had earlier, this is customer service.
Right.
You know, this is no longer, you know, some massive legacy system that runs your back office. This is the face to your customers. So, you know, that it's so embedded in day-to-day business as opposed to, you know, doing processing. It's essential.
Other thoughts, questions, comments on related topics from anybody else? Sloan, the leader of this cross-agency goal? And it's someone who IT is a little bit important to what you're doing every day?
Yeah, just a little bit. Just two quick observations. The question about the customer ownership, I'm still relatively new in VA. I still look at some things sort of from the outside in, and your question about customer ownership, I find in our organization to be a very prominent issue. We have, over the last number of years, created a single integrated IT function, probably one of the largest IT functions in the federal government, I'm going to guess. Maintaining a balance, ensuring that the internal customer is still in the driver's seat is a challenge there. And so we've been doing some things structurally and from a process standpoint to make sure that we have the customer in control of the process. Having said that, we've also been, I think, at least inside the federal government, early adopters of Agile development, which has served us extraordinarily well. We are also building our own digital services team with a lot of help from the guys down at the other end of the table. And I would tell you, as I talk to my fellow deputies across the room, you know, trying to break the code on some of the personnel practices, again, from a new guy coming into the federal government, that has been a real challenge, and these guys have been a great help. The folks in OMB and Mikey and others have been in OPM have been a real help to us as we've been working through that process to make sure that we can use the authorities that are available to us to be able to attract these extraordinarily talented people. We've actually got a couple of examples where some of these folks with these kinds of background and skills have done what from our internal perspective would be described as extraordinary things, projects that had brought us to our knees. And these guys, literally in a matter of days or a few weeks, have created end products, customer-facing, veteran-facing end products that are extraordinary. So that's gotten us very enthused about the opportunity here and very anxious to build out this digital services team, because I think it's going to really be part of the transformative stew that we're trying to prepare over at VA to be able to deliver better outcomes for our veterans.
With that, I'm going to get in I feel like my main role today is to end conversations and move on to the next thing. But I'm going to do that, and it's related. We're delighted that Megan Smith is able to join us today in her first week. I think it's still like second week, I guess, now?
It's day 6.
Day 6, okay, technically the second week as the Federal Chief Technology Officer. That's a role that covers many, many hats, IT among them, but broadly, to your point, Gail, about how do we stay connected to the world externally?
Right.
And it's a role that's supposed to both work inside the federal government, but actually also think about technology policy across the federal government and how it relates to the economy. So she's actually, if we go back to our customer conversations, the federal government is one of her customers, but so is sort of all sorts of elements of citizens and businesses, and thinking about how we can, as an administration, foster the invention, adoption, deployment, scaling up of creation of more technologies. You can probably describe it more articulately than that, but I thought it would be great just to have Megan. She's just started, both get to meet all of you, because I'm sure that will be an important point of interaction for her, and talk a little bit and get some perspective as she's on day 6. So as she told me, she's still asking questions.
Yes. It's great to be here. So thank you. I think, it's day 6, so I thought I just might say a few things and then just ask you guys for input and advice. As Beth said, the chief technology officer, if you think about it, CTOs are not VP Eng. You're not driving the engineering projects. You're not embedded doing that. A CTO is really sort of a strategic role within companies, within entities, to kind of look out and see what architecturally should we be prioritizing, and where might be moving. And often it's not your team who's implementing, it's other teams. So you're doing things. My work at Google was leading the new business development team, which was the partnership team that helped all of our engineering teams get things started. So whether we were starting Android or Chrome or Book Search or other kinds of technologies. So I've been part of that, where it's not your team, you're out trying to encourage others. My actual background is mechanical engineering, and the kinds of things, if you think CTO, it's not CIO, it's not exclusively focused on IT, it's focused on all the technology opportunity ahead for our country and for ourselves. So it could be energy related or basic science related or innovations in biology, all those areas. So the actual mandate, I was going to read it to you as you think about if you have advice for me. It's to unleash the power of technology, data, and innovation to advance the future of our nation. And being an advisor to the president on that and to the country on that. You often focus on priority areas. One of them, of course, is growing the economy and empowering the talent of our country, creating middle-class jobs, improving healthcare, education, public safety, advancing our clean energy future, and more. So it's really in partnership with many extraordinary teams, both in government and outside of government, across the nation and across the world, to be part of that. I'm the third person in this position, and the first person, Anish Chopra, had a lot of focus, needed to do a lot of focus very specifically on technology policy, and has, a great legacy there. The levers of this place are not only tech policy, they're also innovation policy, and also a set of sort of innovation initiatives that you can participate in, of which USDS and lots of collaboration with the CIO was part of Todd's work. Todd Park, who's just completed his position, his work. And I think the Presidential Innovation Fellows is, if you look at Todd's work, there's a broad legacy that he delivered, but a couple of them I might highlight. The Presidential Innovation Fellows are really, there's this thing that Mark Andreessen, who created the first web browsers, says software eats the world. And it's really software, networked people, networked talent, and these tools are coming to every sector as an opportunity. And I think the Presidential Innovations Fellows are a kind of an example of how to bring some of that oxygen, some of that way of thinking together, to your point, Liz, which I thought was really on point, which is you don't want someone over in a vacuum here doing something and someone, the team's over in a vacuum. You want to put them cross-functionally in the same room or digitally in the same space, even if they're not physically coexisting, so that they can really collaborate and bring the best, almost two in a box or multiple people in a box. And I think the Presidential Innovation Fellows represent kind of the tip of the spear of a great advance there. I think U.S. Digital Service also. And so Todd was a big part, not only in healthcare.gov, as they move to fix some of the things that need fixing, but also thinking strategically about how to take that momentum and make great, agile, rock star teams available to this government and to our own government, to the American people. And that's what I think he has a great legacy there with the Smarter IT collaboration with Steve and the team in OMB. I think that what I have started to focus on, it's so early, is really learning and listening. I think there's going to be, there are many things in the technology policy arena to both help remove friction and stay out of the way of the most extraordinary, heroic innovators across our country, and things that we can do to enable them while we're also protecting the American people in ways that protection needs to be there, in privacy and security and other areas. I also think that there's great opportunities to continue the collaboration with innovation conversations in the government itself. Now that there are teams in Smarter IT that are starting to establish, people re-recognize with the kinds of talents together with the other kinds of talents that are already here. That group is coming, that we can bring sort of tech innovation. So just by way of example, I sort of was looking, Helen, from HUD or people from Department of Transportation. There's this wonderful research from Berkeley, Enrico Moretti, faculty member there, who's talking about he calls them the brain hubs, the cities in our country that are just on fire, right? They're just growing and growing. And I think it's his statistic from measuring is that in those cities, every sort of STEM or technology job that comes in generates 5 more jobs. So 2 white-collar, 3 blue-collar jobs. And so how are we collaborating with the most innovative people in our country, around the world, around smart cities, around urban development and transportation? Because we know that those brain hubs are having lots of challenges around how are all of the 6 people able to afford to live there? And how are everybody having quality of life and quality of, reduction of traffic jams and all the things that we need to do, and that the government together engaged with very talented innovators out of our universities and out of our startups and out of our larger companies together in conversation can be moving. And if you look at every single agency of this government, there's a wonderful innovation conversation to have that goes with the Smarter IT conversation and the efficiency that may in fact reduce our costs and improve the quality of everything we're doing and our sort of national future, which I think is exciting. So I think we'll continue to do some work in that area. And the third area is really an area that, early ideas, very early ideas around the American people and the talent of us. And the idea of the technical skills that we have. There's 1.4 million jobs coming in the next 5 years in the IT STEM sector, very much computer science heavy. We have about 400,000 Americans to fill them. So we have a national issue. How do we attract our young people? How do we make those available? Sloan's here to the talented, extraordinarily talented veterans who are returning from serving. How do they make them available to all American citizens who could train for them? And there's sort of just an example we were working on with the VA on issues around the GI Bill. So how could the GI Bill not only be available for traditional university education, but also for some of the new emergent disruptive 3-month Hackbright Academy, Maker Things, and others, and have heard from veterans about great success that they've had in taking those quick trainings and then moving into very high-paying jobs that were beyond their expectations of what they were going to have, and so exciting stuff there. So just lots of thinking about the talent that not only helping the brain hubs, but also helping all the cities and all the people in all these areas of our country participate in the opportunity and the kinds of jobs we all have that are passion-driven, contributing jobs that we were able to bring. So those are kind of 3 areas that I look at. And, it's early, so I'm listening. And so I'd love, any kind of questions or feedback or thoughts or, advice that people have as we put lots of people in the room together to think about our future.
So 6 days in, you probably haven't been digging in too much yet to the budgeting process. And I guess I'm curious because our eyes were opened wide when we first came into the PMAB around the challenge of the budgeting process, particularly as it relates to technology. And I'm curious as to whether that's something that you've observed so far as a friction point. You were talking about friction points. It does seem to be a kind of a significant overlay on top of innovation, being able to project forward where you want to be from a technology perspective. Have you, and again, I know you're 6 days in, has that been something that you've observed as a friction point as yet, or do you just see so much low-hanging fruit that that'll be something that's further down the road?
Yeah, I'm a card-carrying optimist. So I see opportunity and I think Mikey, maybe two things I thought of, and again, very early. Mikey just mentioned thinking through ways to open up how we're making procurement and other kinds of opportunities available to a very broad range of talent to come towards those opportunities, I think is a real opportunity area. The world has evolved so much with the advent of how the internet and the digital networks make things available to smaller groups of people to do extraordinary heroic things, as well as large companies to do really interesting agile things. So there's, how do we open that up? And the other one, I think, again, to touch on what Liz said, instead of, how do you help the technical people and the business leader or the policy leader or the governmental leader be working together? Not, traditionally, I think technology has been thought of more as almost like something like facilities or something you plant. We who, people who were not technical or didn't have that background were often doing very important planning with their set of knowledge, but they might not have had the technical people in the room with them, and so they're writing specs and then handing it off. And in certain settings that works very well. It really doesn't work very well anymore. Because the technology is so integrated. You wouldn't see a corporate CEO not having their CIO or their CTO, in the management team with them, and then, as you go down the chain, those groups working together. And I think it's just a culture shift that has happened. And so we want to catch up with that and making sure everywhere we are. It's one of the ideas, people are working on who is the CTO and CIO for each of the agencies so that the secretary and deputy secretary has their right hand and left hand people available for the conversations, and they can really make great decisions. I would not be the right person to make legislative decisions, and so I would want that teammate with me, and similarly, that person probably would love to have the opportunity to have their technical teammate there to make the right decisions. And I think the last thing I say is talent. People do things. Things don't just magically happen, right? So getting the right talent, the right kind of technical folks in the top seats is very important, and doing really clever things around hiring and making sure we're leading these teams in the directions like the digital service playbook for that kind of tech, this future tech. That uses open source as well as fabulous commercial software in tandem, et cetera, is really important.
Can I put in for that?
Yeah, please.
Having been here for 4 weeks, the budget process has burned me. Yes, thanks for your question. Just speaking, so I'll use myself as an example because I won't hurt anybody else's feelings, but just for my little office, we're never going to be that. We have no ambition of ever being much bigger than 20 or 30 people, right? And just for my little office, we have to start planning our 2016 fiscal year budget plan today.
No,
All
they're
right.
late.
Fine.
These guys
right.
submitted their budgets to
So-
2016.
I have to get on that apparently.
They were all due on Monday for everybody else, right?
I know. Steve has taken care of as what needs to be done, but my only point was we're supposed to figure out exactly what to request. Like, how much travel budget am I going to use in the fiscal year 2016? We started a month ago. I have no idea. Like, I don't know if we're going to be successful. I obviously hope so. We're going to do our best. But if we're not having the impact we wanted to have, then I don't want some giant appropriation in the fiscal year 2016 budget, right? Like, we don't know. Like, our budget process is like I heard a couple people mention like agile development, and a bunch of heads nodded, so everybody I guess knows what that is. Like, our budget process is the antithesis of agile, like, and so I can easily see how the people going through like trying to plan an IT project are suffering through the same thing, right? Like, how many dollars am I going to need to implement an email system that's not going to go live in 2018? I would decide that today. Like, it's not practical. So this is we have several ideas. So like I said earlier, we have several ideas for what might make that better. And before we like throw all of our capital onto one of them or a couple of them, I think we want a little bit more experience since, as I said, I've had all of 4 weeks experience with it right now.
Director's reviews are coming.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like you need to apply the nimble, agile approach to your planning process. And we talk a lot of times in the private sector about this whole notion of strategic planning, and the way it used to be done 3 to 5 years out with the 170-page appendix is completely worthless. I mean, because the environment is changing so much, so that you really need to approach budgeting as nimble, agile, and give yourself room to pivot and figure it out as you go along. So, the approach that we take is, we know 70% of what we're going to end up spending, and then that other 30% has to be about scenario planning and being agile. So, to your point, suggesting that you know what's going to happen to the fifth decimal place in 2016 is finding comfort in a deck. It's not really a practical approach. And so, not only I think this notion of nimble, agile is applied to technology, but honestly, as business leaders, we're applying it to every process that's out there. So a strategic plan that's done now that's actually helpful looks nothing like one that was done when I was being trained up through the ranks. And I'm sure it's the same with everybody else, because it's like, thank you for that look into 2019, next. Who's ever gone back and bridged that?
I see heads nodding on the other side of the room. Yes.
Can I ask, Mikey,
Yeah.
has anyone broken it to you that you can plan 2016, but you still don't know what 2015 is?
I've caught up with that information too. We don't have a budget for 2015, which means that like I'm trying to hire people right now. I don't know how fast or how slow to go. So we're kind of we're kind of putting together. We have a bunch of scraps of funding sources from here and there, and
Exactly.
right. So everybody's in the same boat, right?
Yeah. We may or may not have a CR sometime soon, right? Yeah. Hopefully soon. Yeah, I know.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You guys can ask it, and also,
for Megan?
after your question, I'm going to just turn
I'm
the
sorry.
phone. No, go
You
ahead first. Go first.
Well, one of the things that struck me when you were talking about, Megan, because we are all in search of how do we create jobs and middle-class jobs, right? Everybody is, and it strikes me, with, what's the intersection between, you talked about the GI Bill, what you want to do, massive online learning that's available out there, what other outside universities are trying to do. How do you come together to provide that type of training and make it available? So is the government looking at partnering with, Coursera, Stanford, whatever it is, to get kind of what I call massive online learning out there that help people be trained in the areas that really are where the jobs are? Because all the time we're looking at how do we keep our workforce current, how do we train them, how do we give them the tools so that they can be protected and nimble?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. So I'm going to answer with an old role that I used to have. So 6 days ago, I resigned from the MIT board, and we were part of the teams that looked at how MIT should evolve. And looking at edX and MITx, or HarvardX now, there's hundreds of universities join that. Raphael Reif, who runs MIT, was thinking about the university in 3 sectors, and one was all the lectures and the content that we learn at university, and I'll show you how this has to do with place, and that as that classroom flips and it becomes much more hands-on, and you might be able to watch videos, and other than an amazing performed lecture from somebody heroic, you actually maybe don't need to teach calculus in every university lecture stand and deliver. You know, maybe we can do that a different way, and we can use really clever big data to tune for kids' personalized learning, and really everyone. One of my favorite innovations that we saw was in the material science class, where they allow the students to come in and submit their homework pre-graded, and depending on the grade, they can just have 24 more hours, go outside, sit with the TAs, learn the subject, come back, retest it, and so basically everyone was getting above 80 to 90%. So wouldn't it be awesome if every kid in every class learned everything? Instead of a bell-shaped curve. Like, why did we like the bell-shaped curve? Because the way we were teaching brings that, but why shouldn't every kid learn everything, especially in elementary school? So change the way the content is happening. And that can go, to your point, whether you're grown up and in relearning, you know, like a continuing or sort of career growth area, or whether you're a child, whether you're a teenager or a college student. The other area is just sort of lab and hands-on. And there was a hackathon this weekend of EdTech, and the Rovio Angry Birds team came. And I love what they did, because they said, you know, one of the issues for getting kids more engaged in STEM, there's some really interesting research, and people in general, is if you know why we're studying the math equation, it's far more interesting. So what is the purpose of this? And so they said, you know, instead, they want to launch this $1 billion school. $1 billion school would be, what are the $1 billion problems we face? And so why can't the kids work on them? An example was dirty water, you know, clean water. So instead of learning biology, you could do clean water, and you would therefore have to learn a lot of biology and chemistry and other things, and you could tune the solution work that the kids are doing. So really thinking quite differently about hands-on education, et cetera. And then the third area, that was, you know, that's sort of this lab and hands-on experiences on the real world, but that have to do with learning. And then the third area is about entrepreneurship. And so if you look on any campus, the kids are all excited about entrepreneurship, especially social entrepreneurship. So look at, it doesn't have to be just kids. It could be veterans who are coming back. It can be anybody, but engaging education in the other way. I bring this up because I think the community colleges are a physical place that are near almost every citizen. And so we're just meeting with Dr. Biden's team to understand more about her strategy in the community college, and is that a distribution path for us? And can we, as my point about lecture, as the lecture goes away or shifts into this new mode, can you repatriate those spaces into maker spaces and digital learning spaces and share spaces and startup learning, that kind of stuff, so that all Americans could have access to this kind of place? And not only is it a place where you learn the thing, it's where you run into the network of people who think this way. One of my thoughts, just last point I'll make, is if you got off a plane, you were young, you were an entrepreneur, any age, and you wanted to participate. If you got off of a plane and went to a coffee shop in Silicon Valley, there's 100% chance that if you said, I want to join this economy, I want to be part of this, that the barista would tell you how to do it. And that's not true in many cities in our country. But the people like that are in all cities. They're just kind of hiding in plain sight. You know, they're the TEDxers and the other folks in that city who are doing the start stuff. So how do we make them more visible for each other and almost barn raise this?
So this is all part of a broad-based initiative, and I'm happy to get you some more stuff that's been being driven sort of over the course of the year. The National Economic Council has been sort of the quarterback of a cross-government effort to sort of think about sort of training with the mindset of we should be training for the jobs that exist, and how do we do this collaboratively with employees. So a whole set of programs, the Department of Labor has been key to this. Commerce, I think probably one of the things they did was literally look at every job training program across the federal government and say, how do we flip the model and say it's going to be linked to the jobs that are out there. There's a set of competitive grants that will be coming up for, and largely with a lot of community college input,
Right.
to come together with employers to say, okay, we're going to create a program. We want to work with employers to do that, and those are going to be the grant proposals, and then how do you take that and spread out? It's very much engaged with things like crafting more apprenticeship programs as a very effective way to do hands-on learning to fill these gaps, to take folks who are in jobs that, aren't going to give them the opportunities that we want them to have. And so there's a big program that is a great way, and it is literally linked to companies and starts with where are the holes in the jobs we need? How are we going to build cyber capabilities? How do we do that with veterans? How do we do that with citizens? How do we do this in terms of technical jobs, in the field? There's all sorts of different industries, food safety engineers.
Yep.
You can think of lots of different things. So how do you figure out what the gaps are and get the programs to train to that and fund a bunch of demonstration projects and get that connection going? Because the other piece that you all know is if you look at training dollars, the training dollars that the federal government provides is like this infinitesimal fraction of what all the money is. The money is actually being spent by businesses to train their employees.
Right.
So how do we get those two things aligned as opposed to having them separate? It's a big program. The vice president is at the core of driving it with, I'm looking at the room here, but I bet every single person here has somebody who's part of this task force. So
Yes.
very much piece
And-
of it, and
and part
tied
of
to
the
all
other-
these new ideas.
Yeah, and so we're finding all of those fabulous groups. Sloan, you were just here, this week, and Coursera, Hackbright, like 20 of them were here together with employers, working on that evolution. So it's happening, which is terrific.
So I get to do my fun job in this meeting again, which is to turn off an interesting conversation to hopefully move us to another one. Megan, thank you for joining us. I know you need to take off as
Thank
well.
you.
And the good news is she's here, so we can get her to come back. What I wanted to do, we had a break in the calendar, and my vote, we sort of power through we do the subcommittee things, and then we will adjourn the meeting. But I wanted to give the opportunity for everybody here and for the folks who are joining us on the webcast to hear about the subcommittee conversations. To recap for those who weren't there, the theme that we've been working through at the PMAB is around customer service, broadly defined. And as I said earlier, we sort of split ourselves into two work groups today about two topics that are quite interrelated, but we wanted to have time to delve on each of them. One was around finding ways where our interactions when citizens and businesses and suppliers' interactions with the federal government has a more digital element to it. How do we think about getting feedback through that process? And that was what work group A did. The other work group was thinking about how can we find ways inside the federal government to provide recognition to individuals, because we know they're there already every day doing great things in service of their agency's mission and in service of the American public. So what we're going to do is provide a brief readout from each of those conversations. Those of you who were in the conversation and think that those of us who are doing the readout missed something important, please chime in. Those of you who weren't in that conversation and have a question, you can chime in too. And Steve, are you doing it for your work group? So I will turn it over to Steve. This was on the broad-based theme about feedback, a specific idea called the federal feedback button, but I'm 100% confident, without having debriefed with the team, that the conversation didn't just talk about the federal feedback button.
Talked very little about the federal feedback
That's
button, actually.
kind of where I figured it was going, but that's okay.
Yeah, we centered really around two major themes: collecting and really acting on customer feedback. It was a great, lively discussion. The collecting portion really focused on sort of three areas, and first was really about starting with the customer. This is getting, really focusing on the customer, doing advisory panels, segmenting your customer to understand who your customer is, and then also focusing on the multidimensional nature of the feedback you're going to get from customers. This is both kind of online feedback via the phone, feedback in person, and triangulate all of that when you act upon it. Second was structuring the work you do and customer feedback and the actions around the outcomes you're trying to drive. This is understanding what your customer wants, making sure you understand the end-to-end experience. Ron brought up a good point about, you may have zero wait time on a call center, but if you get a rude call center agent, you're not going to have a great experience. So understanding kind of all the aspects of that customer touch, and then focusing in that area on high volume transaction and highest value transactions. We discussed a little bit about, we're such a large enterprise, we have such a diverse mission, where would you go? And they talked a bit about either starting small and working, or looking at high volume and high value transactions. And then the last point on the collecting side was a very important one that we sort of hadn't thought about going in, which is don't forget about employees. We talked about employees being a nexus of giving great feedback on the customer experience, as well as tracking and triangulating employee satisfaction to their customer satisfaction. And they all reference, I think we saw unanimous head nods on people saying that there is a correlation between those things, and so making sure you don't miss that as well. And then the conversation kind of went beyond collecting into how do we act upon this, and the key points on the acting side were, one, that it's important to gather both quantitative and qualitative feedback, but importantly, and this was new, is really connecting those two. Get some qualitative feedback, go then validate it in the quantitative side, take it online, ask people things like that. And then we had a great point on separating what you can change quickly from what takes time, and make sure you can get that low-hanging fruit taken care of. In that vein, there was a suggestion for us to start at the beginning of the customer experience. Start small, kind of in an iterative way, maybe understand what's that first customer aspect, nail that, and then work on beyond that. We pivoted a little bit and talked about how leadership plays a role in this, and that leadership must make a case for change. And included in this, and I think it probably overlays into your session, is including around celebrating success and understanding when good things are happening, how do we not only drive from the top down the notion of owning and driving change, but also celebrating where good things are happening, and then trying to cross-pollinate that. And then the last point I'll bring up was I thought one of the poignant ones was don't forget about the personal interaction and the personal aspect of this. There was a point brought up that when you're at a TSA gate handing your driver's license over, it makes a difference when the TSA agent looks you in the eye and says that, have a good flight or have a good day, than if it doesn't. And your experience is so much better just from that little personal touch. And if you think about call centers, online, and in person, we have an opportunity, I think, to think about customer service and a culture of customer service throughout that entire life cycle. So that's the center of our discussion, or if I missed anything. Good. Great summary.
Any other thoughts or questions? That's really helpful. And I think, so in our conversation, we were talking about awards and recognition and a specific sort of starting point for a set of ideas. And Liz and Gail and Jeff gave us some incredibly valuable advice, highly tactical, which I've tried to merge into one list, so they'll tell me what I missed. There were many variations on the same themes, although not entirely in agreement on everything. So I think that there were a couple things. We actually started the session with the folks in the room from each of the agencies talking about who their customers are. Because if we think about recognizing people, it's important to start with who it is and what are they doing. And the thing that was, incredibly, at least compelling to me, as it is every time I sort of think about this, it's the scale, the breadth, the diversity, and the way different parts of the federal government interact with people and businesses in their everyday lives, the way they interact with each other in providing services. So when we're talking about customers, boy, do we have a lot of, the other thing is, boy, do we have a lot of customers, because as we went around the room, there were a whole set of folks who sort of said, well, who are my customers? It's kind of everybody, whether it's weather data, the Social Security Administration, all these things, like pretty much somewhere in there, the government's touching you. So it is an incredible breadth and richness and diversity of experience where we're trying to think about how do we do this in the way that we all aspire to every day. We had some very specific, as I said, and tangible guidance about recognition programs. That's what we were focused on. We tried to make this specific. So a couple of points that I will try and highlight. they have to be meaningful and visible. And very much if it sits behind your desk, it's not visible. People need to see and feel and touch it. Examples of Avon pins, Red Cross pins, Eagle pins, other versions of it's visible, like the person actually gets to experience every day, and importantly, their coworkers get to experience it. So it's small, by the way, not fancy, just visible and tangible, touchable. I took that away. Secondly, scarcity counts. You gotta actually make it special to have been recognized in whatever form you choose to do this, because if everybody's got one, it's not worth very much. It's the old, whatever it is, W.C. Fields or Groucho line, Groucho Marx, right?
I wouldn't want to be a member.
Wouldn't want to be a member of a club that admits me. So you want this to be scarce. And by the way, you can think about scarcity in a bunch of forms. You can think about, scarcity at the bottom, but also how do you, do these things cascade up to something really, really, really scarce at the top. So that was another theme we talked about. And while there was value, as folks acknowledged, for the recognition from the top, another theme, and I think this was really important, at least to me, in thinking about how we go forward, is you've gotta actually embed their peers and the front line, because that's where they interact every day. That's where the power it is to shape their individual behavior time after time, as opposed to once a year in an event. So don't, in the spirit of getting something, from the secretary or the president, it's like, that is great, but actually it's the people they work with every day who will make the most difference in their lives and have the most ability to influence them. So don't lose that step in the chain. Another point embedded in the conversation was, while recognition is important, but people have to understand the connection to how they're providing good service links to better results for the customers. It's not, the smile for smile's sake, but it's the phlebotomist who, when they actually are friendly, the person whose blood they're taking, it was Gail's example from the American Red Cross, is much more likely to come back and donate more blood. And we need blood if we're going to save lives. And it's hard to get people to give blood. So if they're there and you have them and you can make the experience good, they will come back. It's the best way to recruit. And getting the folks on the front line to understand that, as opposed to, okay, you're just asking me to smile, is a very different thing. You also have to know what matters to people, and whether that's research, and it sounds like something that the other groups talked about as well. How does it make a difference? Why does this matter? If you're selling cosmetics at Avon, you probably will figure out pretty quickly that good service means more recommendations, hence more sales, hence more awards, but it can relate to other things like the example. So sort of having the front line not just understand what you want, but why it's important to them and why it's important for them to be able to do their jobs better. That was my interpretation. One of the other points, which I think is always important in everything we do in the federal government, and one we can't repeat too often, is keep it simple. Somebody made the comment, and I don't remember who, but I wrote it down: don't fall in love with the nomination process. Because if the process is too complicated, you kind of miss your point. And whether that means it has to be more spontaneous, or even if it's not spontaneous, it has to be simple. Many of us, and I would put myself in that bucket, can take simple things and make them complicated. Resist that temptation at all accounts. Make it simple. I think that's a great one for us, and I think a great lesson as we think about how do we do this. Is this a federal program? Is this an agency program? Is this what do we do? But simple. If we're spending a lot of time designing the nomination process, we spend more time designing the nomination process, I'd argue, than we do helping people understand why service matters. We are definitely in the wrong place. So a good ammunition for all of us. And there's lots of elements about how do you make it personal and touches, whether it's, the value of the random handwritten note, phone call phone call, not an email, from a person. Just the little things like that. Spontaneity is really surprising and very powerful. And one of the last pieces, and then I'll see what I missed, we had a bit of a discussion with the group about the recognitions we have today, and it's a little bit of the challenge of we're recognizing everybody for doing their job, and sort of everybody's getting recognized. And so this needs to be different, and some admonition that says, look, you can like try to change all that, but it might be easier just to do something different as we think about doing this. You might want to change that over time, but not like feeling the need to change all of those things. And by the way, a customer service recognition quote program is one element of a set of programs. It is not the performance management system. It is something distinct from that. Customer service might be in the performance management system, but this isn't the performance management system. So there are many other ways to recognize things. And the last point where we had a little bit of different perspectives is how do you think about this for folks who are dealing with sort of external customers on the front line, the American people, the American business, versus folks who are providing services inside of an agency or between agencies. And how do you think about that customer service, and a debate about whether we should reward both, but we should at least recognize that they're not quite the same thing, even if we want to recognize them both. I think the team, I saw the team that's working on this like scribbling notes furiously, which was really good. Any other comments from folks who are in the group or the PMAB members?
I think maybe the one thing
Thanks,
that you can't stress enough is to link the customer service recognition to the values of the organization, so that it is a visible reinforcing of the values, one of which should be customer excellence in some form or fashion.
That's excellent. All right, we've actually gotten through our agenda. We, partly because we consolidated the breaks. Some of us might notice that we haven't had a break yet. We're going to take a little break. I want to open it up to any other questions, comments from the folks here. So let me just end as I started with a huge thank you to the folks on the President's Management Advisory Board for taking the time, both here and all the way you help us in between meetings. I want to thank everybody from the agencies who came at leadership, and the folks who are driving the customer service teams. You have a critical role to play. And I think we've all come away from this with both more things on our to-do list, but also probably some changes on our to-do list. And that's the point of having these conversations. They're really helpful to all of us. So a big thanks to everybody. Our next meeting is on, it's in my notes here, November 21st. It'd be great to get input from folks now or over time. There's obviously, there's more on this topic, but if there are other topics that folks are interested in, both from the agency side getting input on from these great folks, or from their perspectives where they think they can add more value, we would love to hear those. And with that, I think we can, Steve, can we formally adjourn the meeting? All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you for those who watched on the webcast for your interest in this important topic.